Welcome to the Focus on the Family broadcast, helping families thrive.
John, we're all aware of the constant clash of worldviews in our culture today, and one of the places where that frequently occurs is in public schools. And our guest today will help us with some of the practical advice and application to address that. Together, they've written a book called Navigating Public Schools, Charting a Course to Protect Your Child's Christian Faith and Worldview. The title says it all right there, doesn't it? Stephen and Sarah, welcome to Focus on the Family.
It's great to be here.
That title really does grab it. For Christian parents, I mean, this is the biggest concern when you have children. You do need to be mindful as a parent as you think about the educational course of your child.
You do, and that's one of the things that we've noticed is that Christians are hungry for resources. You know, they feel almost isolated out there at times. And so that was our heart, is to say, wow, how can I take my experience as a public school teacher, a Christian in the schools, and how can we encourage families on how to stay rooted in a Christian worldview at times with an increasingly secular and sometimes hostile environment.
Yeah, and I want to go back to that story, even though it occurred in the early 2000s. You were teaching history, I think, to 4th and 5th graders. God bless you.
Yeah, exactly.
What was taking place? Paint the picture of that environment, and then what happened that pulled you into this fray?
You know, even as an atheist, I loved teaching history using primary source documents. So, for example, learning about William Penn, founder of Pennsylvania, he wrote a document called The Frame of Government. In this document, he quotes Romans 13. As an atheist, I'm like, wow, these founders were kind of like on fire for Christianity and Jesus. But then when I became a Christian, I was like, wow, this is kind of cool that we have such a deep Christian heritage as a nation. So I hadn't changed my curriculum much. In just 1 year, 2003, 2004, a parent started to complain when any of those documents came up.
You're teaching them as historical fact. These are documents. This is historical. This is what happened. This is how they viewed Christianity. It wasn't pushing Christianity.
Exactly. It was just historical and in context historically. I wasn't cherry picking documents either. And so they started to systematically censor. They said you can't hand out William Penn's Frame of Government. You can't hand out Samuel Adams, The Rights of the Colonists as Christians. And they even said that the religious parts of the Declaration of Independence were too religious and it violated the separation of church and state. And that's when Alliance Defending Freedom, I called them and I said, can they do that? And ADF was like, no, they can't do that. You're revising history ultimately.
Yeah.
It was very interesting, too, because the student who would ask a lot of these questions, it was like clockwork. I mean, anytime any mention of God, and it wasn't very often, but if it came up in the classroom, Steve would come home from work, and say, wow, my principal was in my classroom within 3 minutes. That student must have, run home, talked to his mom. The mom reported to the principal and back to Stephen.
And that's part of it. We need to get into the mechanics of it because today there is such a distortion of the separation of church and state and what it means. But let's go there. I mean, why is that distortion allowed to exist? It's not what Thomas Jefferson meant to get religion out of the public square. Correct the record.
Yeah, it's sad how that phrase, which is in an obscure letter by Thomas Jefferson to the Danbury Baptists, when they were saying, wait a second, we're concerned that government is going to start telling us how to baptize or telling us, getting into religion. And Jefferson said, no, the Establishment Clause makes a wall of separation. But all the founders agreed that was a one-way wall. It limited Congress, not the church, not individual Christians. And so it's really been flipped on its head to now be used that, no, you can't pray in schools or you can't, have any sort of, favoritism towards Christianity or any of these things. In fact, now they say it has to be neutrality, but that was not originally the case.
And it wasn't. In fact, I won't have this quote exactly right, but I remember Antonin Scalia, the great, Supreme Court justice, said for a country that prides itself in the separation of church and state, the Supreme Court talks an awful lot about God. And when you get to the Danbury letter, the sentence in there that has always struck me, and if you haven't read it, and I'm speaking to you, the listeners, go Google it. Look it up because it's only about 4 or 5 paragraphs. It doesn't take long to read the letter. And in there, Jefferson says this one line that always, to me, says it all. government should not come between a man and his God.
Exactly. And then in chapter 2, understand the prevailing winds. We take time, and some people say, well, why do you go into so much history? We want to flush that out and show people how that separation of church and state really got distorted and how the secularization of the nation happened. So we give that context in the book historically.
So we're back in 2003. You have a classroom, history teacher. You're teaching 4th and 5th graders. You got one student that seems to be very apprehensive about any mention of God. Probably, I would only assume, I don't know this for sure, obviously, because his parents have said, if anybody at that school ever says anything about God, you tell me. They get on the principal's case. And how did that interaction occur? You came back from the ADF phone call that you had. What took place next?
Well, through that whole school year, I saw the systematic censorship happening, and that's when I called ADF. It wasn't just these, primary source documents. It was, we did lessons on all the major holidays around the world, Kwanzaa and all these other various things. And when
With no problem.
No problem at all. Oh, you're applauded. There's a double standard, sadly, many times. You're applauded for cultural diversity when you talk about other religious holidays around the world. But then I said, well, we're going to do just a lesson on Easter, very similar to all these other lessons that we've done. And they said, oh, no, you can't talk about that because it violates the separation of church and state. Again, this misused trump card, that the school comes down with.
Did they not, when you would have that discussion before it became more adversarial, did they not see the double standard? I mean, these are adults in education. Are they so blinded they don't even see the fact that they're for everything else but against this one expression of faith, and they don't see that as bias?
It really is stunning because I was saying, look, here's the content, California content standards that say it's completely appropriate to teach on Easter or how Christianity influenced the founders or the Declaration. And so, but she said, oh no, it violates it. And then the superintendent and the board said, yeah, we agree.
To add credence to what you're saying, you weren't raised in Christian families.
Not at
all. You
all.
were an atheist, I believe, Stephen.
Yes.
That's part of your testimony. I'd like for each of you to just take a moment and describe your upbringing and your coming to Christ and what that meant to you, and what age were you?
Yeah, so I was raised, my dad was a professor at Cornell, and so I was raised with this kind of academic, if you can't prove it by reason and logic, it doesn't exist. And also raised to believe that all religious worldviews are based on myth and legend. So I'm going through life, got my self-worth through swimming, went to the 84 and 88 Olympic trials, and then I thought, well, if this is all that life's about, we need something else. So then I got a degree of economics at UC Berkeley, went into economic consulting, making some big bucks. And I thought, there's got to be more to life than this. So then I thought if I just get the right job, got me into teaching, and it was great to see the light bulb go on. But I was like, wait, there's still got to be more to life. And so then I said, you know what? I was down in the Bay Area, so I went to Menlo Park Pres, this very wealthy, and I thought I'm going to meet a wealthy Christian girl,
church.
Right? Because I wasn't having the greatest luck meeting babes in bars. And so,
Oh, goodness.
And so,
okay.
so
There's some motivation.
right.
The Lord will use anything to draw you to Him.
I was the wolf in sheep's clothing. It's fine if you get some values from the Bible. And so anyways, long story short, somebody challenged me in my worldview, and it was apologetics. This person was reading Lee Strobel's The Case for Faith.
Lee's a good friend.
Oh, man. So they started to just hammer me with the reliability of the Bible, the archaeological evidence, all these apologetic truths for the faith. And I was like, well, I've never heard this before. I'm a smart guy, Berkeley grad. She hands me the book, The Case for Faith, and I read that in the winter of 2000. I'm 34 years old, and it rocked my world. And I thought, this is incredible. There are brilliant people who believe that Christianity is true, and this mountain of evidence. So, long story short, it was really apologetics the Holy Spirit used to soften my heart. And then I gave my life to Christ and just been lit up in 2001.
Right. So you have the point of all that, and knowing that is you have this great contrast in your own personal life. And so for you, this is important because you lived that lie. And now you're living, biblical truth in a good way, a healthy way. Sarah, how about you? What were you coming from?
I was not raised in a Christian home. Wonderful family, but my parents were divorced when I was young, and my mom got involved in the New Age movement. And so I actually lived in a cult when I was 5, and that's
Man,
that's
that's
a whole other
incredible.
story.
Intense.
But it was very intense. And she actually became Christian out of the New Age movement when I was 15, and I thought, oh, great, another phase that mom's going through. But I would visit her on the weekends, and she would drag me to church. And she did not know this, but I was starting to look into Christianity. I didn't want to give her any
Right.
sense of hope, but
So you
I
sound like a typical teenager.
right. And it was a very long seeking process for me. Through college, I started going to a Bible study with a campus ministry group. My roommate was an athlete, and she was involved in that group. And so I started going to Bible study, and it was a long seeking process. I went to England after college, thought I'd put all those seeking questions on hold, and walked into a very large evangelical outreach on Oxford's campus and got a lot of questions answered. I had a lot of intellectual stumbling
Sure.
blocks and a lot of questions I had about reliability of the Bible, who is Jesus, and I got a lot of those questions answered at Oxford, and I became Christian then and got involved in grad school at Stanford with another campus fellowship. So campus groups were very instrumental in my conversion story, and so I really have a heart. We talk about that in the book, getting kids involved, whether it's in high school or college with campus ministry groups.
And you know, the most difficult, I would think, transition in that way that you experienced is now how your parents are viewing you, a professor from Cornell, you know, your parents enlightened, but your mom being
My mom
a
is a
believer.
Christian.
So
Yeah.
how did they respond to what they were seeing in the two of you?
Yeah, I mean, initially, I think especially my dad, he was pretty hostile. He was like, "Oh no, Stephen has drunk the Kool-Aid and is like completely gone off the deep end." And so, but then he saw the fruit. He saw, you know, this type A, prideful, arrogant young man all of a sudden become gentle and become, you know, more loving and patient and kind. All the fruit of the Spirit really
That's a
started to
good thing.
manifest. And my dad was like, wow. And so they warmed up. And we've had great conversations with my dad, really great apologetic conversations. And but yeah, I'm praying for my dad, But my mom did come to Christ. So it's neat to have.
How exciting. I wish people would simply open their heart to the possibility. And I know they fight that, and I know that battle, and I wasn't raised in a Christian home, and I have that similar experience. But, you know, when you're on this side, when you've embraced Christ, you really do pray and wish that a person that you love and care about, whether it's family or friend, that they would just open up to the dialogue. The fact that they're so shut down and fearful says something about their attitude, right?
Yeah.
Rather than exploratory and what if these claims are true? I don't know why, other than the darkness in our human hearts, why people won't at least say, yeah, what if? So here you are in the school district in Southern California, Beach City, Cupertino, and you know, go to what takes place next. It's not just the adversarial relationship with one student now. You get called before the administration. There's a big meeting. Describe all of that.
Yeah, the district kept censoring these documents. ADF said, no, they can't do that. So federal court cases take forever. So we kind of went through this long process of filing, you know, letters and things. And they kept saying, oh, no, he's violating the separation of church and state. And so finally it went before a judge in San Jose, California, the Ninth Circuit, kind of a liberal circuit. But even this very liberal judge, the school district was hoping that they just throw the whole case out. This judge said, no, you have grounds to go forward with the case.
So in the end, Stephen, the court case goes through. You win. What is it that you won through this victory, and how does it apply to schools today?
Yeah, like I mentioned, all we wanted the school district to say was, you can teach any primary source document, even if it has Christian references. So after that, you know, liberal judge in San Jose said, yes, you have grounds to move forward with the case, the school district was much more amiable to actually talk with us, and they were hoping it would get thrown out. So we met, and they put in writing that you can teach any primary source document, even if it has Christian references. They filed that in federal court, and then both of us sides walked away, and that was the end of the court case. And now teachers, administrators, parents can reference that settlement in federal court in issues that they might encounter.
Yeah, to defend their right to use
Right.
historical documents to describe American history and what the founding fathers and others throughout history have relied upon when it comes to Christian teaching.
Exactly.
That's a good thing. But I want to unpack more of it because the emotions of going through this are what grabbed me. And it's in your book. Again, this meeting, the intimidation
Yeah.
by the school district is really important to understand. And Sarah, you're standing there next to Stephen trying to, you're both of you, very bright people. What is going on? Why are they coming after us? But the big meeting where they called 1,000 employees together to have a discussion and publicly demeaned you describe
About a
that.
history day.
Yeah. So Thanksgiving break is when ADF filed the document. So Tuesday, my ADF lawyer comes in and says, well, we filed it with the principal and the superintendent and the board. You might get some dirty looks. We file a couple of these every week, so don't worry.
Don't worry.
Not a big deal.
We got your back. Maybe you'll get a couple calls from media. Well, so, Wednesday goes by, Thanksgiving goes by, Friday morning, bring, phone rings. This is the Oakland Tribune. We just saw this court case that was filed, Declaration of Independence Band. So I called ADF. Yeah, okay, gave a couple interviews. We knew our lives had changed when Saturday morning rolls around and all of a sudden, bring, it was about 6 a.m. and all I hear is, hi, this is Good Morning America. We'd like to fly you out to New York and interview you about this court case.
Right. You knew it hit the national stage.
And I don't
at
like
that
being in
point.
the spotlight, so this is all very stressful, all the media attention.
It had to be. So talk about how you prayed about it. What were the next steps? And what was the conflict specifically with the district? How did they begin to shame you?
Yeah, I mean, it was, one shaming after another. So, for example, right after that weekend when the court case broke and this incredible media frenzy was hitting it, there was people picketing out at the school, and also both sides, was going on there. Oh, these liberal schools. Oh, these crazy Christians have infiltrated the Cupertino school district. And so they called a meeting of the entire school. There's a large school district in the South Bay area. So, thousands. And so I go into this meeting and the principal basically said, well, you've all heard the lies coming from Alliance Defending Freedom and the teacher they're representing. Like, I'm sitting right there.
Right.
And so total shaming. And then, you go out and tell the truth of what's going on. And so I had people coming up to me so angry.
Teachers and administrators.
Oh, yeah. Teachers came up. This one kindergarten school teacher, red in the face. How could you do this? You're a despicable teacher. How could you do this to Cupertino schools? And just by God's amazing grace, Sarah and I knew we were way in over our heads with this whole thing. We were on our knees in prayer.
We were praying for this specific teacher, too, who kept just using
Hammering.
profanities. It was really outrageous. And we started praying for her specifically. And it was actually really amazing because not long after, well, you can tell the story, she had a real change of heart, which was inspiring.
Yeah, I'd like to hear that. And I read that. And this is probably the most instructive thing for us as Christians, how to maintain the fruit of the Spirit.
Right. So one chapter in the book, we talk about this when conflict is necessary signal for help and walk Christians through how do you handle conflict. And one subsection is speak the truth in love. And so this is where the story. So this one teacher, so angry at me, so skip forward about 3 weeks or so after many tongue lashings. Every time I'd pass her, she'd dirty looks and you're a horrible teacher. What are you doing? And so finally, this one day, my kids had just left the classroom and I'm kind of, okay, what am I going to do tomorrow? What's going on? And there's a knock on my door and I look and it's her. And I go to the door and I open the door and she just had this total peaceful look on her face. And she says, Stephen, I have been horribly offensive and she just totally said, I am so sorry for the way I've treated you. And I said, well, I totally forgive you. And that's, thank you for saying that. And
That took a lot of courage on her part.
yes. And she said this, she said, you know what? I thought that in me, treating you this way, that you would respond like I thought Christians would, and kind of like get in my face or do these things, but you never did. And so she said, you've responded in such a gracious way. I've always said I'd be happy to sit down with you and show you what happened. And so from that point on, she actually passed, she's not a believer. She passed me in the hallway one day and she said, Stephen, I'm praying for you.
Oh my.
What's my point? What's our point is we need to speak the truth in love. Yes, I hope people get some righteous indignation, but then how we speak it needs to be.
Stephen and Sarah, this is really good. I wrote a book called Refocus to try to attempt to do the same thing. And one of the challenges we have is maintaining the fruit of the Spirit in this environment. It's hard to do. And I'm often reminded of Peter in the garden. And what I love about Peter in the garden is the Holy Spirit has not come yet for humanity. Jesus has taught them and he sat under Jesus' teaching. But Peter's acting out of his flesh. I'm going to strap on and go defend the Son of God. But in that context, Jesus rebukes Peter and says, live by the sword, die by the sword. Don't you know that my Father could deliver 12 legions of angels to take care of this? I find it interesting that he knows the number. But the point of that being, after Jesus' death and resurrection, and this is the whole point of Christianity, Stephen being stoned by those people who hated him, and Saul, who later becomes the Apostle Paul, standing there encouraging those to murder him, has the presence of mind to ask the Lord to forgive them because they don't know what they're doing. Right. That's a person who's filled with the Spirit of God and able to maintain the fruit of the Spirit. And it doesn't say anything about not engaging. Stephen was engaged. He was preaching there in the public square about Christ and salvation through Christ and Christ alone. Right. But it came down on him. But that's the difference. And I love your story because it's such a great demonstration of how to respond to hostility in a Christ-like way. It is not easy, folks. And if you're not rooted in Christ, you may consider yourself a Christian. But if you're not rooted in Christ, you're going to respond with hostility. And that's not the heart of God. So well done. We've got so much more. I want you to come back next time. And there's so many people. What parent with a child does not want to read a book called Navigating Public Schools, Charting a Course to Protect Your Child's Christian Faith and Worldview? I mean, every parent and every grandparent should want to get a copy of this. And I hope you do. Contact us here at Focus on the Family. This is how we can help in partnership with the Williams to equip you to do a better job raising your children.
Hey, I'm John Fuller, and thanks for watching. Get more info about Focus over here and more from our guests over there, and be sure to subscribe to our channel as well.